Hey guys, hey, this is Mr. Culhane. We're going to be talking today about um, imperialism in China, as you can see up at the top. Um, so, what we've been looking at and talking about already is just basically the different ways that Europeans went about conquering different parts of the world, and some of the reasons why they wanted to do it. We've already talked about India and Great Britain. Today we're going to be talking about China and the different nations that were involved in spreading their colonies into China. Excuse me. So just a little bit of background. China at this time period is ruled by a dynasty whose leader is called an emperor, and the family name are the kings. And they originally came, if you look over here at the map, from the northern section of China, this region up here near Korea called Manchuria. Now, when they originally took over the entire region of China, they didn't really change too much. They left the culture intact. They didn't want to rock anybody's boat. So they wanted to maintain the status quo as much as they could. Now, this applied to outside influences as well. So they didn't want Europeans coming in and changing Chinese culture at all, because that could affect their balance of power. They wanted to remain the ruling family. So what they decided is that once the Europeans started coming along trying to sell their goods and introduce their way of life, they only allowed 2 cities to trade with the with Europeans. So there was very, very limited amount of trade with Europeans. And if you look down at this map again, I'm going to underline 2 cities that could trade. So we have Macau down here, down at the very bottom, and then Guangzhou, and I apologize if I am mispronouncing those. And Guangzhou was actually known as Canton, Canton. That yellow is probably not the best color to be using on that map. It's a little bit hard to see, but I'll write it right up here. So Canton is the name of the city, and Macau. Those are the 2 cities that Europeans could sail their ships into and trade with in China. They were the only 2. Now, the Qing family made it very, very difficult to even get in contact with them. You had to have special permissions to go see the emperor, and even when you did see him, you had to undergo these very, very formal rituals, and if you messed up at all, you were in trouble. And one of the rituals that has kind of become at least moderately used in our language, we might have heard it before, is called the kowtow. It was just a very elaborate way of bowing to the emperor when you were in his presence. Europeans were expected to do it as well if they got an opportunity to see him. Now, originally, the British were the ones who were trying to trade with China the most. They were the first ones kind of getting into China's sphere of influence, and they wanted to trade with them. They liked their silk and their porcelain especially. That's what kind of the people of Great Britain really desired. They wanted their silk, they wanted their famous porcelain. However, it was really difficult, as we've mentioned, to trade with them because they only allowed 2 cities to open up trade. But eventually Great Britain realized that they did have something that China wanted a real lot of, and that was opium. Now, opium is a drug. Actually, I have to pause it 1 second, guys. I'll be right back. Sorry about that, guys. So, as I was saying, the British realized relatively quickly that the Chinese desired opium. Opium is a controlled substance that has morphine in it. I'm actually not sure it has morphine. It's probably a depressant. But in any case, it's very addictive, and it just so happens that a British colony India, right over here, was able to grow opium very easily. So what Britain ends up doing is actually quite sneaky. Well, I don't know, sneaky. It was beneficial for them. They got what they wanted. So they ended up setting up a triangle of trading. So I'm going to just draw the little map and try to illustrate for you guys what's going on. So we have Great Britain, India, and China. Now, Great Britain's going to transport and sell finished products. So they are an industrialized country. They have factories making all sorts of stuff for cheap, and they're trying to sell as much as they can to India, their colony. Now, in return, India is selling to Great Britain cotton and they are growing opium. Great Britain then sails to China, which is again very, very difficult to trade with, but now they know that they want something from Great Britain. So Great Britain's going to sell to the Chinese opium, and in return, China will sell their silk and their porcelain. So really, I mean, the triangle part comes in. You could say that India is really giving China opium. Just Great Britain's being the middleman. Okay, so opium, not something native to China. It's very addicting. And the Qing dynasty doesn't like the fact that a lot of Chinese people are becoming addicted to this European good and are becoming kind of on better terms with Great Britain. So China decides that they don't want to trade for opium anymore. They burn a lot of the warehouses full of opium, and Great Britain's not too happy about this. And this leads to a bit of a war. And, you know, it's not a hard name to remember. It's called the First Opium War, because it was a war fought over this trade of opium. Now, unfortunately for the Chinese, they hadn't undergone an industrial revolution at this time, so Great Britain has advanced military compared to the Chinese. Their navy is able to easily defeat the Chinese navy, and they actually take control of one of these port cities that we talked about, Canton. They took control of that, and they also, I'm going to go back to the map here. Let me change colors though, since I'm in yellow. They actually sail to another one of the ports, Nanking, right over here, and they seize control of Nanking. So in this process now, they're now forcing the Chinese to trade with them more because they've won this war. And also, they've done something very beneficial for British merchants. They've forced the Chinese to agree to give British people who are in China, it's called extraterritorial rights. Ooh, I certainly spelt that wrong. Extraterritorial. In any event, what it means is that instead of, say, a guy from Britain is in China and he murders a Chinese guy, with these extraterritorial rights, the British person who committed the murder wouldn't be taken to a Chinese court and put before a Chinese judge. He instead would be subject to British laws and be put in front of a British judge. So it completely changes the dynamic of the power within China. Now these British people who used to have to very much follow the rules of China have a little bit more wiggle room in what they can and can't do. Now, eventually, the European powers wanted even more concessions from China. So, again, not really creative with the names here. They began to fight, take a guess, the Second Opium War. Now, in this war, they actually marched on the capital of China, which is Beijing. It was called Peking back then, but Beijing. They burnt down the emperor's house, and they forced even more concessions. If you want to take a guess, the Chinese were not too happy about this. They didn't like the Europeans pushing them around and demanding things and burning down and capturing their cities. At the same time that this is all happening, these two wars, China's population is also growing. China's population is a big deal right now. It was a big deal back then. They already had about 400 million people by the late 1800s, and they also started to undergo really bad harvests. So they have a big pop, lots of people, plus bad harvests make people none too happy. And it actually creates a movement to kick the British people and actually all Europeans out, and it's called the Taiping Rebellion. So what the Taiping Rebellion was all about was it was trying to create, or what they professed at least, is that they were trying to create equality for all Chinese people, men and women. A little bit like communism, at least it's an idea before kind of communism became popular. So it was equality for everybody. Everybody's on the same level. Unfortunately, Taiping Rebellion is put down by an army that was actually led by an American general whose name was Frederick Ward. And by the end of this rebellion, there are estimates that between 10 and 20 million Chinese people were killed or died because of the armies marching through and burning down crops and so forth. But a ton of people just for one rebellion. You don't really hear about it that much, but it's really a staggering number. So after this, the Qing dynasty did attempt to do some reforms to make its people happier, but it was too little too late. The Chinese government becomes more and more dependent upon European powers, and it's really not until much later into the 20th century where, as we now know today, they become much more of an economic powerhouse and are presently one of the most powerful countries in the world. Next, we'll be looking at Japan and their involvement with imperialism. But before we go, I just want to have everybody look at the cartoon up in the top left, because this is going to be a political cartoon that we'll be looking at in the future. And it's pretty self-explanatory. You can see it says China, and it looks like a big pizza pie almost, and these are just different European rulers, except for you can notice this one person. He is a Japanese. He is supposed to be a samurai. It's very stereotypical, and they are carving up the pie of China. All right, have a good one.